Got it.
Got it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hello. Ev-
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday Live Chat. Today, one of my favorite artists on the planet Earth today, and then some, Mr. John Foxx. I don't have any other words except I'm humbled by this today. So thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure, and you've given me a lot to live up to. So, thank you for that,
No, no,
Kevin. Thank you.
that's an honest statement. Mark Spybey is also joining us. Mark is currently also in the north of England. What city is it exactly, Mark?
Red Car. It's not a city. It's a
Oh,
town.
I know Redcar well. Yeah, yeah.
I know you do.
Yeah, we had an interesting incident there.
Oh, I saw you there twice. We'll talk about talk about that
Red-
later.
The Redcar Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, the incident was probably with me. No, I'm joking.
Where are you currently, John?
I'm in Bath at the moment.
Nice. So you guys are in the UK. I'm over here in Los Angeles, California. I guess it's important to just sort of like start out and say, how are you doing now? There hasn't been a recent update within about the last year about what you've been working on or what you're thinking. You're very forward moving. Where are you at now today?
Well, Benj and I we've just put an album together, the basis of it anyway. And we're continuing to work on that in Cornwall. But we've been delayed by the usual British rail strikes and so on. And COVID, of course, was great fun.
Yeah.
But very good for work, actually. It was good for writing. So I wrote a lot of stuff during COVID. And that's the stuff we're putting together now in Cornwall. So we're halfway through that. But Benji's on tour at the moment with Blancmange and various other people. So we're having to delay that till after Christmas now, I think.
Is that a John Foxx and the Maths release then, or is it something?
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
That's great. I mean, it's amazing that you found Benji. I mean, it seems that
Yeah.
finding Benji. I know Steve Mallender kind of said similar things about just his studio alone. I can imagine that it must be able to give you access to that sound, the old sounds, and the feeling with having a producer there that I think you related to, reminding you very much of Conny Plank.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even looks like Connie a bit. It's he's got the same sort of attitude, which is having fun with sound and exploring it, and nothing's too much trouble, to get the kind of sound you want. Benj is also wonderful at linking up archaic bits of equipment, which always drove me balmy in studios. You could never link Korgs up with Rolands and so on. And we spent hours on our knees before Benj trying to get things to synchronize. But now Benj is the master of all that. He can do the lot.
It seems so, and with the look of the gear and the racks there, looks like an old Surge system, looks like a Roland System 700, and the other one here I'm seeing a Moog System 3. I'm seeing like a lot of goodies.
Oh yeah, well, his Moog, or Moog as I'm supposed to call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We Brits call it the Moog.
That's my Canadianism.
Yeah. That's the Moog is made with a tree from Robert Moog's garden. It's one of the original ones he's got there, but he's also got tons of other stuff. And when I went down there week before last, he's just got a whole new plethora of synths. It's incredible.
Oh, really? You can still find something to get.
There's several more modular synths he's got,
I see an ARP 2500 here. I see what looks to be this System 100M Roland up there, the classic old, as we call it, the Human League, early Human League type system. God, he's got everything. So when you go in there, how do you decide like what instruments that you would like to tinker with, or does he have it all kind of like accessible for you?
Oh, I leave it to Ben. I don't want to touch anything. I just let him do it. And then, we adjust it between us, but he's the operator, it's his gear and he knows how it works, how it's linked and how to put it through all the other bits of equipment. We've got lots of old MXR boxes,
Nice.
blue faced, which I love. And I used on Metamatic a lot. So I love putting anything through that, drums, the lot, even vocals, everything. They did the most work in Metamatic, I think.
I mean, that's what we've always loved about you in the way that you do things, like going as far back as, Ultravox with the affected voice and stuff like that. I think it's one of the first bands I ever heard with like such a heavy, prominent effect. So does Benji kind of like applaud like the old sound, sort of sticking to tradition, not letting you use something that's new?
Oh yeah, he's always on patrol. You can't get anything past him. And if I try to sneak in a preset, that's the end of it. He's always on the case there. It's great fun.
He's done a great job, and revisit that in a sec. You've been working for like 40 years on The Quiet Man, your book, and I guess your most recent release is your marvelous notebook, which is readings from The Quiet Man. And I'm gathering that it must be quite fulfilling to finally, see it and be able to, have a tangible product in your hand that has been something that you worked on for so long.
Yeah, it's true. It's been a collection of notebooks in a box, for an accumulating pile of notebooks for about the last 30 odd years or longer, 40 years or so. So it's nice to see it all edited together and in one place. It means I can chuck the notebooks away now, I think. It's interesting. And I never considered myself to be a writer, but these things accumulated when I was trying to develop ideas for songs, really. And the adventures of the Quiet Man was started off with the song, and then it gave me the idea of the person, and that's what I tried to be. And it was my exit from rock and roll, really, trying to be the Quiet Man.
Was that something that like you started like even at the times of like Ultravox or before, or is this something that you've always penned along the way, or was there a starting point that was like your inspiration to start the Quiet Man?
Yeah, I started writing things even before I formed the band. I'd been writing bits and pieces, and as we all do, you keep a notebook and put ideas in it and things you'd like to do in the future. And when I was at art school, even, and I always kept notebooks, and they just got more and more of them over the years, and I think you kind of refine to yourself what you're trying to do, and it gets clearer to you. But the notebooks are it's like your unconscious mind in a way. You sort of put all this stuff down and keep it in a drawer and think maybe there'll be use for it someday. And then suddenly there is, and the whole thing begins to make a kind of sense. It's interesting.
It just strikes me that it's a wonderful project to do as I've just written a book as well, and it's a wonderful project to do as we, shall we say, mature.
Yeah, it's right. It puts your life in some kind of perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's that sort of capacity to reflect, and
you can look back at things in a new light. I'm a great one for remembering things, but not with nostalgia. Really, it's more about what to do next.
Yes.
And you get some perspective from these things you've done in the past. It's like listening to old records of your own, and it is like looking at school photographs. You sort of see yourself in the past and think, okay, where's this going now? Who am I now? What am I doing now?
It's quite funny, really, because Kevin and I were just briefly chatting before we started, and we said, well, I think John's the kind of guy who's going to be really into talking about what he's doing now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you look back at what you've done, it's just, you know, you had a period where there wasn't a lot happening, and then it's just a slew of things. I mean, it's, you know, regular epistles that have been that you've kind of like put out. I mean, I've always felt the same. It's always about what the next project is or what the next idea is.
Yeah, and it's how to make a body of work that works for you, isn't it? Or works for us. Yeah, because I think that's the only way to work. You know, you just do what you want to hear.
Yes.
That's how I've always done it. Yes. Every time I've tried to do something for a record company or for trying to be successful or anything, it's always complete bollocks, and it never works. You know, and I have to abandon ship and start again. You know, I'm thinking I've done this before. What a fool I am to even try it again. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I love like the fact that you stuck with integrity, like what you felt instead of like what they wanted in the sense. And now when you look back on that, it was definitely the right choice, because look how well everything aged. This is just like fine wine. There's like, you know, we can zero in on these works and be like, well, I mean, Metamatic to me is one of the finest electronic albums of its kind. And I'm not just lightly saying that, John. I mean, I hold this album in incredibly high regard. I even keep it in plastic typically. So, but
well, that's very kind of you, Kevin. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's great.
I think it's important to also say that I liked what Stephen Malner said about the interpretation of music by people is like another language, and how they might be in a different place and time and experience it and apply it to their own world. And I know that in 1977, when you released the first Ultravox album, that Mark and I were both 16. We're both the same age now, at like nearly 62. And I remember that I saw that album cover before I'd ever heard punk rock or before I'd ever heard anything about the Pistols or anything yet. And it was the first time in my life in Canada, where I grew up, seeing something where I felt like intimidated by a particular cover style. And I thought like, oh, here it comes. We've heard a lot about the UK, about, you know, if you were a mod or if you were a teddy boy, or, you know, it's kind of like intimidating to think like, wow, what is this? Is it going to invade the shore?
I've got a funny story there, John. I actually saw you live 4 times within the space of 2 years. And the first was in Middlesbrough, at Middlesbrough Town Hall Crypt. Yeah. And I checked the date, and it was about the same time as the first album was released. Well, that's a ticket from the concert at the Coat and Ball. But I went with some friends who wanted to go to, I was 15 actually. They wanted to go and see a band called Supercharge, who I'd never heard of. And I went, and Supercharge were pretty awful, apart from the singer, who was incredibly funny. But you supported them. Yeah. And I think it was even possibly before the first album was released, or if it wasn't, it was just about at the same time. And all my friends who went were all these kind of, I was in a band with them playing terrible rock cover versions, and I was a drummer, you know, and they were all like Wishbone Ash or guitar fans. I hope none of them are listening in. That's Reading. I'll talk about Reading in a second. But I just thought you were stunning. And I was like, I had that same feeling that Kevin did of kind of being intimidated, but the thing that I was watching was otherworldly. It was different. And that was the first time I saw you. So Middlesbrough Town Hall Crypt, February 77. And then the next time was at Reading. That summer, I went with the same group of people. And, you know, gracing the same stage as Thin Lizzy and Uriah Heep and Aerosmith was Ultravox in the middle of the mud. And I can remember the words that you said. You walked onto the stage and you said, "Hello, mutants, how's the mud?" I thought, yes. And then you went straight into rock, which was again brand new, because I'm not even sure that Ha 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 had been released by that point. If it had, it was just about the same time. And that was just that was a kind of paint blistering set. It was fantastic, you know. I'm not sure. You probably got numerous bottles thrown at you. I can't remember, because every band did, I think.
With that type of lineup, playing with Thin Lizzy and all these other things, like, it's important to for me to say that at the time when I heard your first album, I thought, like, this is weird, because we were working on some Bad Company cover, or Feel Like Making Love by Jay Gus.
Right.
I just felt like, okay, scrap that.
Stop doing that. Yeah. So by the time I'd been to the first concert in Reading and the next one, which was in Redcar at the Court and Ball, I'd cut my hair, you know. I mean, it wasn't just because of Ultravox, you know, it was other things as well. But, you know, I'd formed a band with friends, and it was kind of a post-punk weird kind of band, and that was the sort of start of it, really. But it was a pivotal moment, because I really hadn't seen anything at all like Ultravox. And I think one of the things that really attracted me to you, especially, was that he was somebody who actually sang in an English accent. Which at the time was incredibly rare, wasn't it? If you think about it. Brian Ferry, Bob Calvert, there was a handful of people. David Bowie. So it was so rare. But then years later, I twigged onto something listening to My Sex, and I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, this guy's from the north of England. Not only, you know, yeah, he's from the north. I'm hearing the words, and you're saying, and you know, read that you're from Chorley, which is on the opposite side to those of you in the States right now. This is the opposite side of the country to where I am. But yeah, so I've said a lot there, but yeah, it was very it's a hugely influential time of my life, you know. 16.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you can remember it.
Yeah. Well, it's great. I mean, the problem with being on stage like that, or gigging, is you don't gauge the effect you're having. You know, you can't really. You have no idea what effect you're having, if any. And I remember the first gigs, people used to just stand there and look. You know, we felt like animals in the zoo, you know, for a bit. Until people started joining in, really. And so actually some of the best gigs we ever did were up in Middlesbrough and around that area. I mean, it was the wildest bit of Britain at that time, I think.
It was, yeah. You played the Rock Garden a couple of times, which was notorious, you know.
Yeah, it was and I used to love those gigs, because everyone just went balmy, you know. It was completely mad the whole night.
Yeah. I think they got it though, John. I think
they did. They really did. And I used to love going to Middlesbrough, particularly because it was great. You just knew you were in for a good night, and it was completely balmy, and it didn't stop even after the gig, you know.
So I saw you twice at the Court and Ball, which is now being knocked down as well. But I moved back home to Redcar 3 years ago when I retired. Kevin and I met when I lived in Vancouver, but so I moved home, and I saw you first on the Ha Ha tour, and then on Systems of Romance as well. So 77 and 78. So you came to Redcar twice, which is quite stunning, really, because not many people come to Redcar, you know.
I wish I could.
We were the only band to ever finish sets, you know, because the Clash walked off after one song, and the Jam did about 2 songs before they got bottled off and all that. And it was too violent for most people. It's really interesting. And we finished the set. I thought, sod this, I'm going to finish this set. You know, we finished.
I can remember. I think it was
in various gigs. You know, you were sort of determined to finish the whole thing, and we never did not complete a set. Never, not once.
Yeah, I can remember at the Ha 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 show at the Court and Ball, the Power Blue, at least once or twice, because he often did there. Just obviously. I remember Warren, the drummer, like throwing a drumstick, and it stuck in the ceiling. And I kid you not, that was there for a couple of years. So what was your incident in Redcar then, if you know?
Oh, there were all kinds of. There was a lot of glass throwing. I can't remember whether it was Red Car or one. It might have been. I think it was Red Car actually, where people were throwing glasses about, and I got hit by a glass, and
Sounds like Red Car, yeah.
And it bled all over my face. But I thought, great, you know. And I remember challenging people to come up on stage, and I'd kill them, you know, and that sort of thing. Because I was, you know, if you brought up north, you're not averse to physical confrontations. You know, you sort of grow up with it, and you know, I'm quite a calm person, really. But the kind of schools we went to, you had to be able to, you had to take care of yourself. You know, you couldn't not fight, because that was life, you know, and so that was how you took care of yourself. You just did. And it was automatic, you know. Oh, that was fun all round, all over Britain. It was like,
and you had 3 or 4 years of that.
Well, touring was very adventurous in those days, let's say.
Yeah,
and you guys did a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I read somewhere that you were at a Patti Smith show at the Roundhouse, and that you had seen felt the oncoming of like something very new, and so that you kind of knew that the stuff was Tiger Lily like more of a like kind of like a glam sort of like what was inspiring you up to that point?
Well, it was. I remember writing this manifesto about trash, you know, about how we are trash and we're gonna be proud of it and that kind of thing. And this was before punk, way before punk, you know, about 74 this was. And then I heard Noia, and that kind of put that into perspective, really. It was the only band then that had that kind of ethos about making sound aggressive, and it was recovering. I think they were recovering the area from Iggy and the Velvets and all that kind of thing, you know. And then making it German, of course, with some beautiful melodies as well as the aggression. It was a kind of interesting mix. I like that romantic verse and romantic violence, or I mean, violence isn't romantic, but there is some connection along the way, isn't there? With kind of
and
last ditch kind of sadness and melancholy and anger at the same time. You know, we're a composite of all these things, really.
I heard you also really like the Shadows.
Well, certain aspects of the Shadows, yeah. The Shadows are an interesting bunch. You know, they're kind of they're too nice, really. But there were some things when they came out, they were quite futuristic. People forget.
It seems that way.
It sounds. I mean, the equivalent in America was Link Ray and that kind of thing. You know, there was this interest in guitars sounding new, and an electronic instrument had been invented, and it was in common use. And they began to sound not like guitars, you know, they were beginning to sound like something else. And they were connected with kind of space and science fiction and otherworldly sounds. And it all linked in with that, with the theremin and all this kind of futuristic feeling. And when the Shadows came out, I was a kid, you know, and I just heard this music, and I love the titles, Frightened City and Man of Mystery. You know, they were instrumentals, and they were really, they had a feeling of mystery. And when I heard Kraftwerk first, I just thought of the Shadows in that era. It was the same thing.
I can totally see that.
That feeling of space and echoes and modernity and a kind of retrospective modernity. You know, the future that never happened.
I don't know if you know this, but you know, everybody refers to the beat that kind of Klaus Dinger popularized through Neuer's Motorik or Motorik.
Yes,
but they referred to it as the Apache beat.
That's right, yeah, because that came from Apache, didn't it?
Yeah.
There are a lot of connections that are really interesting there. The other thing is that also the Shadows music, at first they didn't write it. That was written by a lot of European immigrants who come over in the war and ended up in Soho in Tin Pan Alley, working, doing what they could. And they were commissioned to write stuff. And none of them really understood rock and roll because they came from a sort of European background from Austria and Russia and so on. And to make pin money, they'd write melodies that had nothing to do with rock and roll. It's an interesting mix, isn't it? It's European music coming into Britain because of the war, because of that forced emigration of the war, and then meeting up with all the other things that were a melting pot in Soho, in London at that point. And then they writing music for this new band that was not trying to be rock and roll, really.
Yeah,
they weren't rock and roll. You know, it was.
It was great till they met Cliff.
Well, that's right. That was the problem.
But I don't know if you've seen it, but I think it's the Thunderbirds movie. There's actually a cartoon, like Jerry Anderson version of the Shadows and Cliff.
Great. I used to live next door to Jerry Anderson.
Oh, wow.
I know him quite well. I knew him quite well, and his wife, Mary. Lovely people, actually.
Yeah. Genius. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also interesting that while you were in Tiger Lily, you had already penned Saturday Night in the City of the Dead and Dangerous Rhythm. So it's certainly, you knew what provoked the change. Was it the oncoming feeling of the punk thing? But what I really like about what you guys did is that you didn't follow the path of punk. You followed a very unique path. How did you make that choice? I'm always interested to ask that.
Well, one of the first influences was the New York Dolls, seeing those, and then seeing Patti Smith, because I hooked onto this New York thing again, which I'd liked from the Velvets. You know, that there's a New York sound, isn't there? That's the kind of raw rock and roll sound that I've always liked, and the Ramones and all that. You know, the Ramones were the biggest exponents of it, but there's also in England, you had Roxy Music and you had Bowie and so on as well, who and Roxy particularly were like an update of the Shadows. Yeah. They had this sci-fi kind of Elvis sci-fi image, styling by Cadillac and so on. It was a mix, and Ferry sang like a French chanteur, which I really liked as well. On top of all that, so here was a band that was looking at Europe, looking at America, looking at style and making something. And I wanted to do a rougher version of that, a sort of New York Dolls version of Roxy, with a bit of Velvets and Iggy thrown in. It was something like that. And we were going to be a lot trashier than Roxy. And that's what we did. That was it. Really. So it was all those influences. And all this happened really quickly. It was in a year or so. And I remember at that gig with Patti Smith, that was very interesting, because there was Lydon beginning to dress up like Lydon.
Wow.
And there was Mick Jones, and I thought, I should ask that guy if he wants to play guitar, but he looks too good. Guys who look like Keith Richards at that point. Keith Richards Jr. And I thought, he can't be any good. I bet he's no good because he looks too good. How wrong can he be? And oddly enough, Mick was sizing us up because he came to the marquee and he thought we were too far advanced, because we were on at the marquee, but we're only supporting, we're supporting a band. But he thought we'd already got off the launch pad, but nothing could have been less true. So there's all that mix of things going on around, and you had a feeling that things were just about to take off. Everybody was forming bands. There were bands everywhere, but they weren't playing anywhere because there was nowhere to play yet. The 100 Club maybe, and support at the marquee. and the odd pub back room that we used to play in the Pied Bull. That's where Mick used to come and see us and so on. So there was this feeling in London that things were about to take off. No one knew quite what it was. And then McLaren came along, of course, and he'd been managing the Dolls, and he'd been to New York, and he'd seen that CBGB scene. So he was starting it off in London. And I remember going into Sex or Let It Rock and so on, the shop, with Billy, and checking it out, and thinking, this is beginning to happen here. Things are beginning to happen. So it was all like that. It was all very unknown. You were driving very fast into the future without knowing what it was consisting of. You just had your own instincts to guide, and that, I find, that's the most exciting thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's also fortunate that somehow you were able to make the introduction to a Roxy Music member, Brian Eno, probably the most futuristic guy of the band. Was this as a result of playing so many times live and then being signed with Island, and that's just a fortunate thing that happened? How did that happen?
Well, Brian had just left Roxy, and he was around Island, and in Island Records there was a big sort of social room that was usually full of rastas smoking dope at that point, and everyone who was signed up would come in and hang out during the day and that sort of thing, So I used to see there occasionally, and then one day I had a word with him and said, do you fancy producing our record? So he came down to rehearsals and recorded a bit of it on his little recording machine, whatever it was then. And then he came back and said, yeah, let's go. So we got some money from Chris Blackwell and started off making the record. It was as informal as that, really, at the beginning.
That's amazing. What was the first song that you guys made, or where did you see his role being the most important at that time?
Just to give us permission.
Yes, support.
Yeah, because, he did a lot more than that, of course, but I think the problem was in studios then, you couldn't touch anything. You weren't allowed to, because the engineers were so possessive. They'd almost smack your hand if you tried to touch a fader, And I just wanted to get my hands on the equipment. We'd been in studios with that kind of engineer before, and I thought, I don't want this anymore. It's terrible. And we'd met up with Steve Lillywhite, who was working at Marble Arch Studios, and he was the tape op then, really, which is an apprentice engineer, but he was really good, and he said, come in dead time at the weekend and we'll make some records. So that's what we did. We just went in there, and it was great being in there, because we could experiment and play with everything, and we made the sounds we wanted to. We recorded 2 albums. They're the first 2 albums, basically. And then we did some tracks with Brian in Island Studios, and finished off the whole thing there. It was, and I think Brian was up for anything. He just wanted, like us, he wanted to see how far he could take things. And let's distort the vocals. Okay, how do you do that? Well, put it through an amp, or we'll distort it in the desk and that kind of thing, And we were all trying to make equivalents, like, let's make a William Burroughs track. Now, what would William Burroughs sound like if he was a singer? That kind of thing we used to do. It was just great fun. And meanwhile, the Stones we took the studio with the Stones, because the Stones weren't supposed to be in England at that point. But they did sneak in, and they used to, they took the nights and we took the days. So I used to wheel Keith Richards out the studio in the mornings.
Is that the story where the story of Keith Richards walking in on the sessions come from?
Yeah. Well, he was there every day, of course.
That's fun.
But he was always asleep when I came. I used to come in about 10 o'clock in the morning, and he was always asleep in the chair, and everybody had left. They just left him. So I used to wheel him out into the corridor, and then about 2 hours later he'd come in, and sort of say, "Hi guys, how you doing?" Chat, drive off in the Bentley afterwards. It's great.
Classic times. Steve Lillywhite, of course, going on to huge career himself, and you're there, right? It's first album, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, Steve was great. I mean, he was dead keen. He was like us, we just wanted to make something we hadn't heard before, and if we could, and Steve was up for it too, And it was a great combination, Steve and Eno in the studio together. I mean, that's what U2 did later on. It was interesting that they took the same combination.
Yeah.
It even came out on 8-track.
Yeah.
I've Dangerous Rhythm, all these songs are just like, to me, absolute classics. But for me, I mean, I'll never forget the first time I heard My Sex, and I gather you asked this a million times. But like My Sex is like, I don't have words for how, when it starts, I know every word and I want to sing it along with you. And it's one of those things that I think that anybody that knows it well has a love for it in that sense. Your way with words and the way that you construct your lyrical is so unique, and you've continued it on throughout your career. But what was the inspiration for this style?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember. It started off with an idea of I wanted to get a heartbeat and trigger synthesizers from a heartbeat via electrodes.
Oh, nice.
And that's why it's got a heartbeat. We tried, and what I was going to do was my girlfriend Maggie at the time and I were going to make love or have sex and see if the heartbeat synchronized, and also see if they could trigger synthesizers, so we could actually make a love song, a proper love song. And that was the idea of My Sex to start off with. There were numerous technical problems, as you might imagine, and then I said to Brian, let's just record a heartbeat and see. So we tried to record a heartbeat, but it was too muffled and it didn't work well enough. So we went back to a drum loop, and it all became a bit more prosaic, but I kept the words and the form of the song. And then Brian and Billy worked on the melody that comes in the middle, that really nice melody.
Beautiful.
And the whole thing came together beautifully, I thought. And it was the last track we did on that album. After then, I thought we should start from this again and make another album, really. But of course, it was too late. We finished, and that was it. That was the budget used up, and the record came out.
I was going to ask.
It was an indication of a new direction, and that's what excited me. It was a new thing. I hadn't heard anything like it before.
No.
Did it surprise you how it turned out after you were recording, or you could see these energies coming together into this final result?
Yeah, and it was easy. That's the other thing, and I was suspicious of it because it was so easy. I thought it can't be any good because it was so easy. It wasn't any effort. A lot of the other songs, we'd put layers of stuff down and taken things back and play with them again. And My Sex was just done in a couple of hours, really. Apart from the false start with the sexuality and the triggering and all that. The actual recording was very quick, and I was foolish enough to be suspicious of it. Now I know that when things happen that quickly, there's something important going on.
Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah. Was it something that you had penned before you had recorded, say in the notebook that you'd been speaking?
Yeah, I'd written the words and the chords, it's 3 chords, and it's sort of based on My Death by Jacques Brel. It's that kind of feeling, you know. And I like Jacques Brel a lot. I like his songs, you know. So it was heavily influenced, but I wanted to make a modern electronic version of Jacques Brel, really.
Perfect result. And to this day, how do you feel at its age? Do you look back on that now, and what's your thoughts on as you look back on it now?
Well, I do think it was a new thing. I think it indicated the path I wanted to take personally, you know, apart from the band, really. That track I felt it was very important. It wasn't personally very important. And then I did, after that, I always did something like, there was Hiroshima Mon Amour and Just for a Moment and Dislocation. And those are very much my kind of thing, you know, and that was what I wanted to pursue, and that was the beginning of it. My Sex was the very beginning of it, and no one else was playing anything like that then. Nobody. There was nothing like that.
Yeah,
and I'm proud of that moment. Really, it was the beginning of something new, I think.
I can remember seeing you do My Sex when I first saw you in Middlesbrough at that time at the Town Hall Crypt, and just how different and how incredibly otherworldly it felt. But yeah, I was also thinking there when, you know, you were talking, there's something very elegiac about the whole thing. It's very beautiful. At the same time as being difficult as well, which is what attracts me to it. And there's all these sort of connections, you know, there's a strong connection there, I think, through Eno to the stuff that he was doing with Cluster and Harmonia. And there's that, and then you end up working with Conny Plank on Systems of Romance, and you know, there's this kind of synergy going on, and a Europeanness as well that I think was very, very different to a lot of the British music that was being made. You know, a very strong sort of like European feel to the whole thing.
Absolutely, that's what I was trying to do, was to link those things up. I wanted to link up with Europe, and because I thought we'd had enough American stuff. As you said, everyone was singing with an American accent in England at that point. And I wanted to get away from that. And it's not that I didn't like the American things. I loved it. I mean, I grew up with Elvis, and he's in my blood. You know, I love it. And the blues, my God, you know. I realized, you know, I'm not on Highway 61 or Route 66. You know,
you're not from Route 66. That's the point. The point is, from Lancashire.
Yeah, I'm from Lancashire, and you know, my motorway is the M1, and that's it.
That's right. That's right.
And I grew up in post-industrial Britain.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write things about that, and I realized that what I had to do was write an equivalent to American blues, but that didn't sound anything like American blues. So I had to use what I had around me, just like a blues man would, you know. An electric guitar in Chicago was big news in the day. And a new kind of music came out of that. New equipment, new music, you know. And here we had these synthesizers and drum machines, cheap for the first time. You could get hold of them and use them. So that was the mission, really. And it was just beginning in 76 when we recorded that first album. And that was the first taste of it. And Brian had that gear and he brought it in, and we started using it, you know. So it was a new world, and it was very exciting. And I realized what was happening. You know, I thought, this is a new music made from cheapish instruments that you can get your hands on, and we've got to make something new with it, just like an American bluesman would have done with an electric guitar in 1945. You know.
Yeah. I was also thinking there as well. I had a thought that in each of those three albums that you did with Ultravox, there were kind of markers in that told you something about the next album, or in the case of Systems of Romance, told you something about Metamatic. And the markers were, you know, My Sex, Hiroshima Mon Amour, Quiet Man, Dislocation, Just for a Moment. And it's like, it leads into something else.
Yeah.
And you can definitely see that now as being, you know, there was I think it was only 2 years, wasn't it, that you released those, just 2 years, and there was 3 albums in 2 years. So there was a huge development there going on, and then it took a little while, but Metamatic went into that next realm.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly what happened. And I remember when we done Hiroshima, for instance, that I knew that was the end of the old phase and the beginning of the new thing. And I think I'd already written Can't Stay Long, for instance, as well. But it was too late to put it on the album. And I didn't want to anyway, because I thought that's the next album. It's part of the next album. And Hiroshima, One and More, all those tracks like Hiroshima, My Sex, and so on, they should have all been on the next album. but they were the end of a phase, you know. They were all the end of a phase and the beginning of a new phase. I think Hiroshima was the big end, you know. That was really the end of that, of everything else, and the start of a new world of sound that we were trying to get into then, really.
Yeah.
And you used this drum machine on that track, correct?
I did, yes, yeah.
Do you still have it?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So that signifies the future right there.
Yeah.
I want to be a machine. I would like to speak about that one briefly for a second. It had the most fantastic lyrics. It has the most fantastic lyrics. It has the loudest bass guitar I've ever heard in my life. And just something about the production of it, I kind of equated it to a more like an apocalyptic space oddity at a level that it's absolute classic on that, for me anyways, on that level. I just think that we can't pass that one over without pointing out that, you know, Wide Boys with your use of vocal distortion and effects, dangerous rhythm, as I said, the lyrics of I Want to Be a Machine and My Sex, and the whole sort of movement forward into the advent of you seeing a vision about by using a drum machine and by trimming down the sound, it seemed to be something that you were sensing. How was it? Was it the inspiration from Noy and Kraftwerk, which was somewhat more minimalist in that sense, that was bringing this on?
Yeah, it was that, and also just a feeling that was in the air about the way things need to go. And I used to listen to bands all around at that time. Things were going on in London, and I was checking everybody out, and I just thought it's all a bit conservative still, and we need to move on somehow. And it wasn't clear how, but there were these indications, you know, there were just some indications of how you could do it, and trying to not to be the same as everybody else. I mean, the whole point of bands at that point, everyone was competing like crazy in London, you know, for attention. And I just thought, how do you differentiate yourself? You can't be the same as everybody else. It can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, let's go, you know, because it's been done. Yes. So what's next? And I thought, right, well, let's go right against the grain, you know, synthesizers and drum machines, but make it all sort of dirty. And because I was also very interested in the idea of science fiction at that point, but not fantasy, but ideas about examining what is just around the corner, like J.G. Ballard and Philip K. Dick and that kind of thing, you know. It was really science fiction talking about today and where we are now and what's happening, but in a slightly disguised sort of manner. And all those writers didn't have a clean view of science fiction. They had a more threatening, weird, more true version of how things would be, and that rang a bell. But at that point, all science fiction films, this is before Blade Runner and all that, were all about a clean future. You know, everything was clean and tidy, and so on. And I thought the future's not going to be like that. It's going to be like Singapore or the scuzzy side of New York, but different again. And I was trying to write music that would service that as well. So that was a big influence. That Ballard and Burroughs and Philip K. Dick sort of examination of what was actually happening at the present, in the present.
Yeah, I think that it's obvious that you had a very clear vision, but was it so that you toured so much with Ultravox that you realized that you couldn't do it with that band?
Well, it was something like that, but I just realized I couldn't do it with any band, really.
Interesting.
Because
you guys toured forever, right?
Sorry?
You guys toured like hundreds of shows, it seems.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
You got it out of your system.
In Europe as well, and I'd had enough of it. You know, I'm not naturally. I don't naturally want to be on stage, you know, to be honest. And I thought, how can I do it so I'm not going crazy all the time? And then you could suddenly buy a 4-track tape machine and the synthesizers and drum machine all fell into place. And it was like having a laboratory at home where you could work. And because I was an art student, studio was the natural place for me to be. On stage wasn't, you know. I had to invent somebody else to be on stage for me, you know, the John Foxx person. And it hurt after a while. I don't know if you've experienced this, Kevin, but touring sort of drains me psychically.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you.
You come off tour and you're like a ghost, you know. I am anyway.
Yeah.
And you know, I need to go in for repairs for a couple of weeks, and it's not easy.
You see,
if you do too much of it, it'll kill you, won't it?
At first, you're so excited about it that you get depressed when you come home, and then it's like the complete opposite. After, it's like I can't wait to not do that again.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was, and we came back from America. We did this 6-week tour with 1 day off, and I thought, I don't want to do this anymore, and that was it. You know,
it wasn't an easy-looking tour, John, from what I could see. I mean, you were playing a few nights at the Whiskey a Go Go. You know, not the best venue. The Fleetwood in Redondo Beach was your last show.
Yeah.
With Ultravox, I guess. Period. Right. 1979.
Yeah.
Look at that, in Redondo Beach, the last show with John Foxx and Ultravox. You lucky guys, and you played the Squeeze in Riverside. That is just absolutely crazy. I mean, those are, you know, punk rock clubs.
Yeah.
And so I can only imagine that you being on tour was so challenging. And then, yeah, when you feel that way and you get home and, you know, you've got a new idea in your mind and everything, I can only imagine that finding, was it Pathway Studios that you discovered at this point? And then you developed a relationship with Gareth Jones, which again, I mean, the guy's gone on to be a very legendary producer. You grab him right at the beginning, and you guys are there experimenting in Pathway with what, again, a nice collection of equipment.
Yeah, exactly. Not masses of stuff, you know. It was just 4 or 5 boxes and a synth and a drum machine. You know, CR78 was a new thing at that point.
Can you imagine?
It was great fun, and
the CR78. Let's see. I've got an idea that it. Something happened here. I know the CR78 was the main drum machine, but somehow you worked wonders with it. What were you accenting it with, like hand percussion?
Oh yeah, we used lots of things. Well, I actually used the ARP as well for a lot of percussive sounds. The Odyssey was a great instrument, and you could get good drums out of that as well. So it was a combination of things. We just used anything to make a good sound, you know, anything that was lying around the studio.
I mean, as you approached it, I know that you were saying that you had 8 tracks to work with, and so Underpass was actually constructed using 6 tracks.
Yeah, that's right. I did want minimalism. I wanted to make it as minimal as possible, really. So it was a string machine there, the Elka, and ARP Odyssey and CR78 and a couple of MXR boxes and a Space Echo.
Yes, the 201 or 301.
301, yeah.
The classic Space Echo. That was your only reverb that you used on the album?
No, there was an old plate reverb made out of a big sheet of tin with two contact mics upstairs, and that was the reverb. Yeah.
You didn't have the AMS yet?
No. There was nothing. That wasn't invented, I think. At that point.
Yeah, that would be luxury too by then.
It would have been wonderful. Yeah, very expensive. I only used cheap gear.
I mean, for what you guys did, I mean, I can imagine that you sat around and I've heard that you guys sat around and got real excited about the sounds that you made. But to make an album like Metamatic without a sort of like easy method to sync to a CR78, how did you guys deal with synchronization and stuff like that to track?
We did as little as possible. I did have a sequencer. I had an ARP sequencer, which we used to use occasionally. And yeah, I'd trigger things off that. But triggering was a nightmare in those days, as I said before. So I tried to avoid it because I wanted to keep the song and keep the excitement. And you lose the excitement quickly when you're trying to hook gear up together, as you must have experienced. I mean, you know, nothing will kill you quicker than trying to link two pieces of equipment together that are reluctant to do it. You know, sabotage yourself very quickly like that. So I determined to make things quick and easy and minimal, and no fuss. So to make rhythms, I just use an echo on a keyboard and play it by hand. So
nice. So it's all hand played then.
Most of it is, yeah.
That's, again, that's super admirable. And you had written He's a Liquid and Touch and Go already with Ultravox, so you came into making the album with ideas in hand. Was this ideas that the guys in Ultravox were saying, yeah, or were they sad when you left with the songs?
No, I played some of them too. We'd already played a couple of them, but I didn't feel they worked with a band. It wasn't the right instrumentation for me, and we were all getting fed up with each other anyway. I think really by that time, 5 years of touring or whatever it was, 4 or 5 years of touring, and it was time for a change. And also the band, to keep a band going financially, just so you can eat, you have to sell some records, and my ideas were a bit too uncommercial, really, and the guys needed to make some money. And I remember Billy being really, particularly being keen to have some success, and I thought, yeah, they should have some success. Why not? That's what bands are about, really. And I thought, I'll just cut loose and I'll do my thing, because my thing's a lot more risky, really. It's not, you couldn't drag 4 or 5 people around with you.
Yeah.
On this kind of thing that probably wouldn't work out at all, that I was so keen on. And I was aware of that at the time. Most of my ideas were just not going to sell many records, at that point.
It's amazing that, you went from Island to Virgin, which at the time, I thought Virgin was kind of an exciting label. And it seemed like they gave you a lot of support.
They did.
That's great.
Simon Draper, who ran Virgin, it wasn't Richard. I mean, Branson was the money man and he made the deals. He was a great businessman. But the man who made the choices was Simon Draper, who was the best guy around. And he was really keen on German stuff as well. What had happened is there was a success with Tubular Bells, and Branson's cousin was over from South Africa. That was Simon Draper, and Richard said, "Do you know anything about music, Simon?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm really keen." He said, "Well, do you fancy running Virgin for a bit, and he said, "All right, I'll give it a go." And that was it, he sort of chose the bands and all that, and then Richard would handle the money side of it. So all the choices were Simon, and Simon was brilliant, and he just gave you carte blanche and said, "Get on with it," and then you gave him the master tape and they put it out, and that was it. There's no other record company that operated like that in London at that time. No one.
That's fantastic that you ended up there. I think that, Island kind of ended up going a little bit of a weird way after that too. So it was kind of good that you got off the ship. Not to skip ahead too quickly, but by this point in your career, you've already worked with some fantastic people and producers and inspiration. And we can't really skip ahead without mentioning Conny Plank again, that, being interested in Noi and being interested in the scene and being able to go to his studio and record, I'm sure that must have implemented a lot of ideas into your brain about maybe how to undertake the next phase.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Conny, as I said before, was the crossroads. He was the end of the old kind of music and the beginning of the new. He was the beginning of the future, really. And there was no one like him. There was no one like him in England. There was no one with that kind of understanding of all those areas that I was dead keen on. Brit psychedelia, German electronics, New York Velvet's kind of music and Iggy and that kind of thing. And he was just really intimately interested in all that, plus all the avant-garde things, the Stockhausen and Cage, Pierre Schaeffer and all that.
Absolutely. Did you take away anything from Eno or Conny in the sense of something that you carry on to when you make an album?
Oh, lots of things. Yeah. Mainly about being hands-on yourself, operating the equipment as much as you can yourself, and not being afraid to take chances. Conny would do all kinds. He'd put vocals through piano strings and, feed things out into amplifiers outside and re-record the whole thing, distort anything.
Perfect.
He'd go to endless lengths to get the kind of sound you wanted, and he'd have his own suggestions as well. And mixing was a delight, because he had about half a dozen space echoes, and he would try to make this kind of ambient field to set things into. And he'd spent ages working on positioning stuff and moving stereo around. And he had all these devices. I remember that the desk was pre-automation, and it was run by elastic bands tied onto pencils and all kinds of little devices that he had to link tracks up together to move them all at once, and it was all improvised, hands-on, taking the equipment to the max, moving as far as you possibly could to subvert sometimes the equipment itself, using it in ways it was never designed to be used. And he delighted in that kind of thing. Every time he got a new piece of equipment, he'd sort of walk around it and figure out how to really disrupt it.
That's the perfect.
It was great. It was great fun, I remember the first time I walked into Connie's studio, I was working with Holger Chuckeye from Cannes, and they were doing that movies album. And it was all sort of tape loops and speeded up things they got off the radio, and they were making this album that was entirely new. There was no sampling there, pre-sampling. Yeah. And I just walked into this room, and there were tape loops going on tubular metal chairs around the studio. It was like walking into a spider's web. Yeah, with all these tape loops going all simultaneously, and they were tuning things by hand to make them compatible to each other by slowing the thing down with your fingers or a pencil or something,
Brilliant.
It was all completely hands-on and completely improvised and completely new. There's a wonderful, exciting feeling. And Conny was there. He was the man. He'd set his studio up so he could do that kind of thing, because he was fed up of trying to do it in conventional studios. He thought, I've got to have my own studio. So that's what he did. He built it the way he wanted to. It was built in a barn. You know, the first time I'd seen a studio without any sound control. You know, the room wasn't made into a sort of hermetically sealed boxes that you usually had in the studios. There were speakers there, and he thought it sounds okay. I had bales of straw around to absorb the bass, you know, that kind of thing. So he knew exactly why you did everything and how to make it work, you know, without any messing around or any expensive acousticians coming in and giving you a bunch of balls about how things should sound. He listened, you know, and he figured it out himself. I really admired that guy. He was one of the most exciting people you can ever imagine to work with.
So many gems of production. I must say that I worked in a dance club that was probably like one of the ones where you would go to in the early '80s and hear Underpass. Underpass sounded fabulous, and there was a dance for Underpass. I mean, it was a first time that I'd seen sort of, I'll call it like semi-speed skating. It looks like a speed skater, but it really worked with that song. And I was the light man at the club. So I basically could hear how it sounded in the club and everything, and nothing shook the club like Dislocation. So one thing that I realized is that Conny must mix that differently as well, because it again is electronic, and it seems to have some sort of drum machine bass nature. What was the basis of that song versus the other ones?
Well, that started because Billy and I walked into Conny's studio one morning, and there was an ARP sequencer. So we thought, yeah, let's have a go with that. And we plugged it into the ARP and pressed go. And there was this sequence in it already. Somebody had put that in, but it was in a different key and a different speed to how we played it. So it wasn't recognizable. It's just the faders on this sequencer, the pitch controls were in that position. So I said, yeah, let's loop that. I can make a song out of that. And I already had some lyrics, and I thought, yeah, let's do that. So we just put it up, and it worked. It just worked straight away. And it was a really powerful sound on the ARP. It was already made, but by two different people. You know, it wasn't meant to be linked up like that, but it just worked. And I immediately got a song for it. And then Warren did. Oh yeah, we got the ARP to do the drum sounds as well. That was the drum sounds are all made on the ARP. And Warren punched them in appropriately, and we triggered some of them off with the sequencer as well.
Was that triggering an ARP 2600 as well, the ARP sequencer to the 2600?
No, it was just the Odyssey. That's
triggering the Odyssey. Awesome.
Yeah.
The Odyssey seems to be like the golden synth of most of your work. Those beautiful alien-esque lead lines. Is that the secret?
It's all ARP, and the ARP, I just never exhausted that machine. Still haven't. You know, it still surprises me. It's a great little machine. It's a noise maker, you know. And I had all this theory about music being organized noise. That's what it is, really. And the ARP confirmed it. You know, you could. I was really proud when I started making very abstract noises and putting them into songs, you know, and making this new kind of sound with it. I remember on 20th Century, for instance, having just pure white noise, you know, sections, and I thought, yeah, that's great. No one's done that before. Let's have some of that. And it's so exciting that you could do that with this one machine that's about this big, you know. And it seemed to have infinite combinations. There was nothing it couldn't do. It was wonderful.
And also with the theme, you've always enjoyed films where half the world is abandoned and overgrown, and that sense couldn't be truer on Metamatic. Coming through with, I mean, my God, Touch and Go, the end part of Touch and Go, like the whole arrangement of the melodic structures, like I just can never get enough of that song. Just the whole theme of like the way that you're strolling around. He's a liquid. The album in itself, to me, is I don't know anybody that I've met in my life that hasn't cited the album as a gem and a complete influence to the rest of the genre. So basically, if influence and the interpretation of hearing something and then inspiring others, that album is like got to be the fire starter for so many bands that would probably just make the mark right here, right now, and just say, John, you're the king.
Well, thank you. All I can say, but it was really meant to be. I mean, the thing about abandoned cities and all that is that's how I grew up, you know, up north. Because it was the end of industry up north, you know, and if you've grown up northeast, or northwest, you've had the same thing, haven't you?
Yeah.
You half the city's derelict, and it's increasingly derelict. So you feel you have this end of the world feeling, you know, that, or at least end of that world feeling.
And there's the nature kind of taking over from the industry, and then the industry sort of fighting back, and there's constant tension between the two.
Yeah. And then new roads coming through and disruption and of strange kind that you have to come to terms with somehow. And there's all that, you know, growing up with all that, you have to deal with it. And the only way I could deal with it was by writing music or using the noises to make music with. And that was the intention of Metamatic, really, I think.
And were you living in East London at that point in time? Was it?
Yeah, I was living in London, but I was also going back up north a lot. I used to go back to Preston and Chorley, you know, to work and get ideas and go walking. I used to do a lot of walking. Well, I still do. And walking's great because you can refine songs in your head as you're walking along. You know, it's that 120 BPM is how I walk, you know. And I could sing songs and get ideas and finish songs off like that.
I think it was also important for you to point out that you wanted synths to sound like synths.
Yeah, very, very true. Thank you. Yeah.
Important point to make on this. And
yeah, because I felt they'd been misused before then. They were always trying to imitate something else.
Right.
And I thought, no, let's not do that. Let's just make them sound like themselves. These are new machines. You know, we've got to develop a new language for them, really. And you've got to listen to the synths, you know, and let them dictate where they're going.
I'm really enjoying the extra tracks that you've included on the Metamatic extended version, like the Critical Mass, Miss Machinery, Film One, CinemaScope, Glimmer, Mr. No, Young Love. Some are B-sides, but just all the material on there. It's just so fantastic. It's a beautiful listen. I encourage everybody to go and get it on John's Bandcamp. It is available.
On CD as well, isn't it?
Mm.
I got this nice little box set.
Oh yeah. Well, I still like CDs, you know. I like everything in one place, and you can just stick it into a machine and off you go, you know. Without
the immortal Burning Car as well.
Oh, Burning Car, yeah. I like it.
I love, absolutely love. Yeah.
I'm sad that I haven't got a chance to see John Foxx live.
You've seen him right now.
I'm so happy that there are these events happening with starting with Lewis Gordon and where you're remaking or bringing up to date some of the songs and performing them and doing all sorts of activity as a result of Metamatic and the interest that people have. I just hope that it will make its way. I know that you're doing that now more so with the Maths, but I just hope that it will eventually make its way. We're going to talk about touring again. John, you probably don't want to go on tour though, right?
Well, it's okay in small doses, you know. Yeah. It's the long tours that kill me. I think 2 weeks is okay, and then after that, I need to go away for a bit. So it's possible to do things, and we were planning to do things with the last album we made, Howl, We were going to do some gigs with that because we got Robin back, you know, the guitarist.
Yeah.
And he's a great inspiration for me. And I love working with Robin. So and playing live with him is a dream, you know, because he's fantastic live, really good, powerful guitarist.
He is like the thing that came along in Systems of Romance. Obviously, has a very definitive style. He's played with you on The Garden. He's played with you on tour when you toured again in '83. He's back when you did the 2010 show, and now he's back on Howl, and it sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
It's almost almost like it's come full circle in a weird way?
Yeah. I always wanted to. My only real regret from leaving the band was that I didn't do more work with Robin, and that lasted many years. And it even when we were playing together on The Garden and that, it was never enough. I really wanted to make him central to an album if I could, you know, because he deserves to be. He's an original. He's an original guitarist. You know, there's McGeoch and him.
Yeah.
And that was about it, really, I think, during that era. And everyone else took from him. Everybody, all the new bands took from Robin that guitar sound. And he's never had any real acknowledgement of that. People imagine guitar was always like that. Well, it wasn't before Robin and McGeoch came along. Guitars didn't sound like that. And they made a new thing. And Robin...
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it interesting that Robin ended up taking John McGeoch's place in Magazine as well?
Yeah, and there's a reason for that, isn't there? You know,
yeah.
He was the only guy. He was the only guy who could fill those shoes. You know? And vice versa. You know, they were the two guitarists. Those two guys, two completely original guitarists in their time. No one else sounded like that. No one else had that kind of power, effect. No one. They couldn't work with modern songs in that way. You know, they were at the forefront of developing that new guitar sound that everybody now uses and doesn't know where it came from. It's ironic, you know. Yeah. You trace it back to those two guys. That's where it came from.
I also saw Magazine at the Red Car Curtain Ball as well on their first ever tour. I think it was their 4th or 5th ever show, which is
great band, original band. You know?
Yeah.
I think that's great that you know you establish a connection with these certain people, which you enjoy relinking with them, and to hear, you know, that Robin. I don't know. It's just I like these stories like this. You eventually went on to form your own studio and build your own studio. Was that something that, I don't know, I kind of expected that you would build an electronic studio, much like Pathway, but what was the garden studio that you built like?
Well, that developed, it was originally going to be an 8-track, like as Pathway was, small 8-track. Mm-hmm. And then we got more ambitious. And I made some money, so I thought I'll spend it on the studio. What else am I going to spend it on? You know. So, and at that moment, a couple of friends of mine wanted to buy this building in East London, in this derelict part of East London, Shoreditch, which was derelict. It was empty. There's nothing there, and it was cheap. It cost my studio cost £10,000. You know, to buy the building, the share of the building. So it was irresistible, you know. So I went in and did it and bought equipment. And then there was a recession on at that point. No one was investing in studios. And all the studios were a bit worn out. Mine was brand new. So there was a queue of people to come in, you know, who wanted to use it. Mostly people I knew. So I used to give people the keys and clear off for a couple of weeks, you know, and work writing or so or whatever, and then come back and so on. That's what went on.
And then you got AMS, right?
And then I got an AMS. Yeah. I went up to see EMS. Yeah, I went up to see them, and I tried to get one for free, but they wouldn't give me one.
Oh, they're expensive too.
They cost a small fortune. Yeah.
They really did.
They were worth it. They were good, interesting instruments in their day, of course. And that was made up north as well.
But sooner or later, something irked you about something that was going on, and you basically, I loved how you said, I really didn't like the mid 80s scene, the pure white sort of like pop schmuck. And you said something like they tried to popicize sort of like one of your tracks, and felt that it was time to go back and focus on the artwork that you do, which is fabulous.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, I was that mid 80s was crap. It was awful. I hated the music, and I listened to the stuff I was doing. I thought, I've been infected by this crap, and I hate it. I hate what I'm doing. And if you get like that, it's time to call it a day. So I sold the studio and went off to do what I went to art school to do in the first place, which was to do graphic art, really. And it was a whole new career.
And Dennis Lee put John Foxx into the fridge.
Absolutely, yes, exactly. Into the deep freeze, yeah, for a few years.
And what's the take on it at that point? Did you actually just going to play it by ear? You're going to see what happens and then decide later?
Well, I thought it might be all over because, in every career, if you like, there's a down point, isn't there, where you fall off the radar and you're driving on the pavement rather than in the road, and you know it. And the health, some people carry on, but I thought, what's the point, really? I'll just see what happens. And fortunately, I had these other skills, so I was lucky. I was very lucky, and I could make a living doing this thing, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it. It was great fun. I had to read all the modern novels that were coming out, and I'd find my images on the front of them and on other things as well. So it was really satisfying. It was exciting. I enjoyed it. And then things began to happen again, acid. I heard acid for the first
house
time.
music.
Yeah, house music. Oh, Detroit came up trumps, it was wonderful. I heard Detroit music, and a guy called James Pinker, a friend of mine in Vauxhall, where Russ Mills, a friend of mine, lived, who was an artist who was doing a lot of work on album covers at the time. I used to go around and see Russell, and we'd go for a drink with James, and James said, listen to this. And then the music was just coming in on cassettes, there weren't any records really at that point. He played this tape of Detroit music, and I thought, yeah, that's good. And he was saying, you should get out there. It's beginning to happen again. Music's come back.
Yeah, right. You could see a place for yourself in that.
Yeah.
Because it got colder and weirder again, and more surreal, so to speak. And then you had Tim Simonon.
Yeah. Yes. There was a whole scene beginning to happen. I remember we went to the Fridge in Brixton, and there was Lee Bowery all dressed up like I don't know what he was dressed up like a pound of pudding or something. It was amazing with polka dots, and it just looked and felt like New York in 1975. It was really exciting, and there was all this new sound made from old equipment that had been got out of pawn shops and so on. It was all the 808s and the 303s and the 101s and all that, coming back. And very simple and minimal, exactly how I like it. So I thought, yeah, I'm at home again here. It's good stuff, this. I'll get into this. And then Tim turned up, and he said, let's do some work, because he bought Metamatic and when he was a kid, and it was one of the first records he bought. So.
Oh, absolutely. I can understand him wanting to reinvigorate you. And the first thing he does is he gives you a gaming job.
Yeah. Let's do some.
Let's score a game.
Computer games, which we did. Yeah. It was good fun. It's all very interesting. It was all new, and it got to number one. God's got to number one in the game.
Very popular game.
It's a big game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean I don't know if you enjoyed the work for that. I'm actually doing that right now. I don't know. It's actually
Interesting. Yeah, well, it'll have changed a lot.
yeah. But I mean, I was kind of interested. It's kind of seemed like you took some time off, and I was wondering who actually like encouraged you the most to make music. You had a friendship with Harold Budd forming, and could it have been Harold Budd, or could it have been Lewis Gordon, or could it have been Steve D'Agostino? Who was like the one that like helped you to feel like I need to make John Foxx music again?
I think it was Louis, really. I mean, all the others are important. Harold's fantastically important to me. You know, one of the most important people I've ever met musically. But in that way of that kind of music, you know, that sort of calm, reflective music. But the Madborn was Louis, Mad Mancunian, you know, energy unlimited, and it was right in that Manchester dance scene that had really kicked off in that period. And
for sure, you had Warp Records forming, and then they came to you right away, and they wanted you to make a video for LFO, and right off the bat, you're back in the underground world, just swallowing it all up.
Yeah, and it was all happening everywhere, and it was really exciting again. You know, there was an underground. If there's no underground, music's dead, isn't it? I feel that there's got to be an underground movement that's just about to emerge, and that's what I've always been involved in all my life. You know, I grew up age 14 going down the Twisted Wheel in Brasenose Street in Manchester, listening to bands before they surfaced, you know, and I'd hear the Yardbirds and people like that, and then you'd hear John Lee Hooker next week, you know, and so on. And then that underground scene is so vital. It's what happened in London in 75, 76, and then later on in the end of the 80s with Detroit and all that coming back. And then Manchester kicked off, you know, and there we were. It was back full circle. And Louis was part of that. Louis just said, "Come on, you've got a tour. Let's go out." And I mean, he's all energy and fire and all that. So I thought, yeah, you can do the dancing. I'll just stand there and play something. and he loved it. You know, it was great working with him because he just fired everything up with energy, and it was wonderful. Human blur. If you took a photograph, Louis was never in focus. He was always blurred in every photograph.
Not blurred in that one, is he? No.
See it in his face, can't you? You could just see that manky madness. You know, it's exactly what he was.
So, you guys also made a lot of albums together, and inspired you to put together what you guys toured in Japan a couple of times.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
So, was he kind of like? I heard that you had seen him do some 4-hour set one night. So he's like this. Kind of like, again, another studio workaholic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, 12 hours straight was no problem for Louis. He just did it. And I remember walking into that room the first time. It was a friend of mine, Chris, who said, "You've got to see this guy. He's really good. You know, you'd like him because he plays cheap synths and plays all night." So I went to this party down in Herefordshire and walked into this room, and it was all smoke and lights and all homemade and improvised, and this booming sound, you know, that went on for ages, and the smoke cleared and it was just Louis with a few cheap drum machines and a dodgy synthesizer that only half worked, you know, and a guitar, and off he went, you know, and it sounded great. So I said, yeah, let's do some work. So we went up to Manchester a week or so later and started working Cromie's studio in Manchester, in the Sankey building, which was where the remnants of all that scene in Manchester ended up. You know, Tony Wilson had his offices there.
Yeah.
How did you enjoy working with Harold Budd? I love the albums that you made. The two albums, fabulous.
Yeah, I've been lucky in my life to meet these people. You know, like Conny and Harold and Eno and Louis, everybody I've worked with has been fabulous, you know. And Harold is outstanding. He's just
Like,
an inspiration like nobody else. You know, you're so easygoing and wise, a wise man, a quietly wise man, and very courageous. He did that one thing beautifully, more beautifully than everybody else.
just
And
a legend.
yeah, he is. I can't find words for him really. He understood recording as well, which is marvelous. You know, he understood that when you record something, it's like looking down a microscope. You know, you're looking at something that you see every day, but in a different way, and it's held and kept so you can pay attention to small movements and detail in a way that you can't live. Recording is a different thing. It's not live, it's a recording. And a recording is something that's there forever. And you can examine it minutely. And it's a magnification of the world, and it's a suspension of time, you know, in a completely surreal, strange way. Recording is a really strange thing. And he brought that to my attention like nobody else. He understood that process instinctively and reacted to it. And he realized it wasn't all about beats. I mean, I love beats and I love aggression, but there are other things. There's another side to music completely that's totally different. And he was the man. And I'd always loved Eric Satie when I was at art school. And I thought, I'd love to do this. I love pianos, but I don't know how to do it in a modern context, don't know how to do it. And then I heard the pearl that is one of the 20th century's greatest achievements, I think. You know, those three talents of Harold, Eno, and Dan Lanois.
Absolutely.
Dan Lanois is the best landscape artist in rock and roll. You know, he just is. And Brian, with that kind of perception and encouragement that he can give. And then Harold with this totally unique take on piano and how to play it. And that understanding of time being suspended and minute attention to detail and calm. It's a fantastic combination. It's great.
It's a question of how do you integrate with Harold Budd, where it's just like the space you practically don't want to say anything, do you? It's like you have to be very careful about how you'd approach that.
Yeah, but he's so careless, Harold. He just plays, and then he won't play the same thing again. And if you don't catch it, it's gone. That's the end of it. You know, he won't do it again. And that's what's so good about it. You know, it's the moment. He's very interested in the moment and how to work with that. And he'd even say, here's a chord, now do a piece, you know. He'd give me a chord and I'd you know, and that, but it was his chord, you know. It's only one chord or one movement, you know. And he would always, he'd say there are too many bits in that, there are too many changes. Let's just keep it to two, you know, and see what we can do with that. And he was always right. Cut it down, make it into something very small, seemingly small. But of course, when it's recorded, it's magnified, isn't it? You know, it comes out of the speakers. And there's this huge thing that wasn't there before. It's miraculous. It still amazes me. I mean, music, there's nothing there. It's all in your head.
Yeah.
There's a movement of air.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all there is.
Yeah.
And what it does to the human mind is phenomenal. It's absolutely.
Yeah.
And Harold was the first person who really made me understand that. You know, we'd be working in the studio and we knew there was nothing there, but you were making this world.
I think that's the key there, isn't it? With that kind of music or this kind of music is knowing when to play and when not to play, and to create the space.
Exactly.
Because you're right, because all of the great work is done by the listener.
Yes. Yeah. It's like good drawing, you know. A good drawing doesn't draw everything. It lets your mind link things and imagine things and piece things together. I mean, there aren't any lines around anything. But the way our mind works is we connect these things together ourselves. We make the drawing ourselves. You know, there's nothing there. There's a line that doesn't exist in the real world at all, but yet we interpret in that way. Music's very much like that, you know.
Yeah. And that interests me as well in relation to your music, because you consciously stripped things away, didn't you?
Yeah.
Consciously took away elements and then exposing those sounds that you talked about earlier on, those, you know, making synthesizers talk their own language, which I think is a fascinating concept, really. And making musical equipment, allowing musical equipment to speak their own language instead of insisting on them using your language is incredible.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that also came out of dub, you know. Lee Perry and also all those dub records in the late 70s that were coming out. Gareth and I used to sit in on sessions in Pathway where a bunch of West Indian guys would come in with these stolen tapes from Channel 1 in Jamaica. And they just have 1 hour in the studio, and that's all they could afford. And they bang out about 6 mixes for 12-inch records in that time with a Space Echo. They borrow my Space Echo, you know, and sort of go, oh, yeah, let's have some of that, and they'd be off, you know. And we just used to watch the way they just expose the bass drum for a bit, you know, and then an echo, and then a bit of a vocal, and so on. Yeah. It was all complete. That was completely new. I hadn't heard it really before. I mean, I'd listened to a lot of early reggae up in Manchester and all that, in the Ponderosa in Manchester, but this was a new way of dealing with sound, you know, where you isolated one sound to make it infinitely powerful and big. It makes it big. It gives it all the aural space that you've got. So it makes a sound tremendously important. It's the importance of minimalism, isn't it? And another lesson was hearing Lemmy when he played with Hawkwind, and I came upon him in Portobello Road in I think it was the late 60s. They were playing a free concert in Portobello Road, and Lemmy played. They all played this chord for ages, same chord, and then they changed it. Yeah. It was like the earth had gone underneath, you know, the earth had moved underneath you. It was the biggest feeling the most powerful musical feeling I've ever had, I think, really, to hear this chord change, just one change. After it had been going on for about 10 minutes, you know, boom.
And you had that wall of noise as well from the audio generators that were just. I can remember listening to that music with headphones on when I was a kid and really trying to hurt myself, you know, because it felt like it was kind of like trying to assault you, but in a really kind of like cool way, you know.
The way you wanted to be assaulted, you know. It was just you were volunteering for this thing, you know.
That's right.
Take me over, you know. It's just great, you know. Here comes this force. I'll go with it, you know. I'm not going to fight this. I'm with it, you know. It's a great feeling, isn't it? And music can do that too. You know?
Yeah, it can. Yeah, it can. If you allow it to.
If you allow it.
If you allow it, yeah.
Now you have to volunteer to sign up.
Yeah.
I have to say, like, I've never enjoyed studying somebody's material more than this week, than some of your stuff that I hadn't been too familiar with. And your My Lost City, I love your take on your Cathedral Oceans, on the Tiny Color movies, the Machine, the E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops score, perfect dystopian science fiction theme music. Again, the Ghost Harmonic with Codex, with solo violinist Diana Yukawa, and Benji and John, like unbelievable. Something just so satisfying about it all. The Kurfürstendamm Dam and the underwater automobiles on the Tiny Color movies. I just thoroughly enjoyed the adventure of going through all of these releases, which are available on your Bandcamp, and some fine artwork too, as usual.
Thank you. Yeah.
When do you decide on any given day that you're going to make art or music, or do you do it both each day?
I do both each day. Yeah, I always wake up with a lot of ideas, and if I'm lucky, I might get one of them sorted out during the day. But it is a constant, and I'm very grateful for it. You know, I don't know where it comes from or why I need to do it. Really, I don't care to examine that, but I'm just grateful for it, because the nice thing about music is you don't retire, do you? You don't stop.
No.
And that's what I love. And I feel sad for friends of mine who have had a job, you know, because I've never had a job. And, you know, apart from...
For the video game.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, that's not work, is it, really? It's just fun. I mean, and the whole thing is fun, really. So I never felt like I have to go to work, you know. And I've been very lucky like that. And it's the whole thing is you sort of get engaged. You wake up in the morning, get engaged, and stay at it until you're too tired, you know. And then it's time for a glass of beer on the end of the day, you know. And it's wonderful. I can't.
I'd like to join you in that beer. One thing that I really enjoyed last night that I hadn't been too familiar with is your albums that you did, A Secret Life and Evidence of Time Travel, with Steve D'Agostino and Steve Jansen.
Yeah.
Of all people. And I was surprised to hear on A Secret Life, the Jansen album, that it was like almost like tonal Buto music, like no drumming at all, like for something that featured a drummer.
Yeah, well, that was the gong when I heard Steve play at Harold's concert, actually. Harold did a sort of Frank Sinatra type retirement concert, you know, where he came back afterwards. And Steve played this huge gong, and I thought it was a really exciting sound. It carried on resonating for minutes after he touched it, and you could feel it in the hall. You know, it's a really the wave movement of the waves, you know, in the air. It's really quite something. And I just wanted to try it. We didn't get it on record because you can't really. It's not. You'd have to just have that alone, I think. And I think that's what ought to be done with that sound, is just to record it by itself and not with anything else. We mistakenly put other things with it, but I like the tracks and I like the results, so we kept it. But really, it deserves its own space, that music. And Steve D'Agostino, I worked with him in just before I met Tim Simonon in the same studio. I just bumped into him and we got talking, and he recorded some piano music, some of the first tracks I'd ever done after Harold. So we became friends, and he loved all that kind of music, and he loved taking chances. And you get these spirits, don't you, around you, you know, that are the good spirits, like Steve, Louis, and you just feel immediately in accord with people, and there's a mutual understanding there. You just work together, and the work works out. It's a marvelous thing. And every time I come across somebody like that, I'm very grateful for it, because, you know, you're going to be in for some good, interesting work.
I absolutely love this album, The Evidence of Time Travel. I hadn't heard it, and I was totally blown away. Rhapsody in Flames. This is the only person that I could see that you might. It's not on your list that you haven't worked with yet. Is Ryuichi Sakamoto?
We almost did.
Oh wow!
That was some years ago with It was talked about when I was at Virgin Records. We were supposed to be doing an album together,
I think that would have matched nicely.
It would have been good, yeah. And I did, because I like Yellow Magic Orchestra at that point, you know.
Yeah.
And,
One of my
uh,
favorites.
I found it very interesting music, and Ricci was just beginning to come out. Well, I think he'd left YMO at that point, and he was looking to do new things. And David Sylvian was working with him at that point, and they said, come and join in. But I always felt three people doing an album together was probably a bit too much, too many cooks, you know. And it didn't quite fit with my philosophy of minimalism. I thought I could just about work with one of those two guys, but not the three of us in the room somehow. It just seemed too crowded, you know. So I didn't do it. I regret it, you know. I should have gone and tried it, really, because I'm sure it would have worked out. Because they're both amenable people, you know. They're not difficult people. They're good listeners, and they sensitive people. So I regret not doing that, but I didn't do it for that reason.
That's interesting. But it's not to say you haven't worked with many other greats. Robin Guthrie, your collab with Robin is I like how you let the person that's you're collaborating with like have their sound, and you work within that. I find that like super interesting.
Well, I love the way Robin plays, and again, he's unique. He's another unique guitarist, isn't he? And I've always loved the Cocktails. I used to go to their concerts. I loved Elizabeth's voice, one of the best voices ever in music. You know, she's totally wonderful. She's the Aretha Franklin of the avant-garde. You know, she's absolutely wonderful. And Robbie's guitar playing is unique. You know, there's no one else. It's like an infinite evolution of Dave Gilmour, and it's a new thing as well. It's a new sound. You know, he used boxes and equipment in ways that no one had done before. So it's totally unique, and I was very privileged to be able to work with him. I think I feel privileged. It's not humility, because I'm not that humble a person, really, but it is a privilege to work with these guys. You know, you work with these people and you think, yeah, this is great. Being in the same room, it's fabulous. You know, it's good fun, and as I say, it's like a science. It's like a seance. You know, where nobody knows who's moving the Ouija board, but boy, does it move.
Absolutely. And that's a great analogy. I love that. Also, your work with Yori Halkonen. Just, how is it you know when someone's right to work with?
It's just a feeling you get. You can tell sometimes just by the way people look and their attitudes. You know, it's a thing, isn't it? I mean, you must have the same reaction to people yourself, Kevin. You know, you go into a room with people and you just know, don't you? I mean, studios are great places. They're psychological hothouses, aren't they? Psychic hothouses.
Absolutely.
You walk in there and you put your antennae out, and you can feel every vibration in the room. It's like a fly walking into a spider's web, isn't it? You know, the spider's in charge there. He feels everything, and it's something like that. It's just the electricity in the room. You're sensitive to it.
How many artists have had a remix by David Lynch?
Oh, that was a great thing. Yeah.
My God.
God bless him. Yeah, good man.
Did you ever meet him?
No, and I wish I had, really. I mean, from Eraserhead onwards, I was a fan straight away. I saw Eraserhead. I thought, yeah, that's the art school movie that I should have made, you know, and I never could, of course. But he did it. He made the best art school movie of all time, or film school movie of all time, in Eraserhead. Wonderful.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree. It's funny that some people, they'll go to that movie and they'll be like, I don't get it. I'm bored. And you'd be like, I'm riveted. I was riveted the first time I saw it. It's like, oh no, this can't be happening. This is like inside my soul already.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
All the best things like that you recognize, don't you? It's a new thing, but you recognize it straight away. It's
Absolutely.
like picking up the first Marvel comic. You didn't know what it was, but you knew you wanted to read it.
Yeah, absolutely. You could get a sense right away about what you almost hope to be in there, and then if it
Yeah.
was in there, that you got that buzz of like, oh wow, it's actually going down the path.
Yeah. It's interesting that sense of recognition is really interesting. I think I was talking to Stephen Merritt, from Magnetic Fields in New York about that very thing. That there are things that you pick up as you. I always think that everything that goes by us is like a stream, and there's loads of trash and crap in it and rubbish. And then every so often something magical comes along in there, and instantly we recognize it. And I don't know why, I don't know how or why, because there's so much noise and so much other stuff. But yet we pick these things out of the stream, don't we? And I love that process of suddenly seeing a light in all that rubbish. And all these things, they're not immediately recognizable. Sometimes they're despised forms, rock and roll, comics, cheap movies, whatever. But you love it, and you don't quite know why. And oddly enough, 20 years down the line, they become foundations of a new kind of culture, a new episode of culture. And it's all instinct that draws you to these things, I think. And that's the process I look for.
Yeah, me too. I also wonder whether or not we had to work a little bit harder for it as well, given the paucity of stuff that was going on around us certainly when I was growing up. Music was John Peel, the old grey whistle test, and not a lot else.
Yeah,
you had to search for things, and you had to kind of make those discoveries for yourself.
Yeah, that's very true. But I think things haven't changed. They're just different, because now you have the web, and what's more confusing than that? It's overexposure unlimited, and
infinite sea of choices. Yeah,
there's no editorial.
Yeah,
it's a plethora of bilge, and in among it there are some gems, but it's a wider river than it's ever been.
It is, yeah.
I think you still have to look. You still have to search for stuff.
Yeah.
I absolutely love Howl, and I think that it's exciting to, have it back in the place with Robin Simon, Hannah Peel, yourself, Benji, making something that is killer. Like Howl, Strange Beauty has a cinematic splendor that I can't explain. Tarzan and Jane, Regained, ready for festivals. I mean, you guys you're back in the position to do 100 shows again.
Yeah, no chance of that.
No chance. But
well, we want to play live. Actually, I'd like to do it, because if there's ever an album that's been made by me and the others that deserves to be played loud, it's loud and live. It's that one, I think. Really, it's a live album, isn't it? It's a band.
I would really like to see it as well. Lately, Heaven 17 just did a tour of America, and it was one of those things that it was so good that people had to say, "Wow, oh my God, I wish I caught that." It kind of caught people by surprise, I think, and I think that you and the Mavs would be the same thing. I guarantee there would be such a strong buzz about it that it would probably make you pretty happy. I would really like to see that happen too.
Well, thank you. I'd like to do it, really. I think, and I think the others would as well. I know Robin. I mean, Robin loves playing live, and Hannah does as well, and Benj as well. They're all live players, really. That's where they prefer to be. I'm Benji and I are studio people, really, but Ben loves getting out on the road. I mean, he's on the road now. He's playing live now as we speak, you know. And Hannah works all the time. You know, she's a 24-hour person. She just does it all the time.
Is she related to John Peel?
No.
No relation. Just
No.
similar. I've heard her work is absolutely brilliant, though. What is it that she mainly contributes? Is she the violinist, or is that Sarah?
No, she plays violin, yeah, but she plays keyboards as well. You know, she can play anything. She's one of those people who can just pick an instrument up and off she goes. You know, that's it. Piano, keyboards, whatever. You know, it's all violin. She's a very good violinist, and she does have this skill because she understands harmony. She's classically trained and all that, so she can go into a track and pick parts of it out that need to be emphasized and underlined and worked on. She'll provide a counter melody. She'll boost something. She'll make it thicker and stronger, or more refined, whatever. You know, she has great taste, and she works, and she understands noise. I mean, there's no one who's made the most aggressive noises I've ever heard from instruments than Hannah. She just loves distorted violin. You know, John Cale would be proud. You know,
John killing your heart out.
she gets up there and lets rip, you know, with all kinds of boxes on. She treats it like a guitar, you know, off she goes. So there's that merciless side of her as well, you know, which I love. I love letting that rip.
That's awesome. I am excited for the new album that you guys are working on. When do you see that coming out?
Well, as soon as we can. It was supposed to be out after Christmas, but COVID and
Right.
and so on, you know. But all being well, we should finish it early next year. So towards the end of next year, I hope.
Nice. And that's on Metamatic Records, of course, your own label.
Yeah. It's interesting because of Brexit, this wonderful Brexit that we had. It's cocked everything up completely in England. Because you have to, a lot of the pressing for records and so on, vinyl and CDs and so on is done in Europe, you know. And because we have two lots of taxes to pay now, instead of just firing things straight off and coming straight back free of charge, because of Brexit, we have to pay two lots of taxes, export and import taxes. And everything slowed down as well.
Yeah.
You know, the material shortages, you can't get hold of vinyl because of the taxes and so on and all that. It's really wrecked production for records. I mean, this is boring stuff really, but if you want to bring a record out in under a year, think again.
Can you imagine like your old schedule? You used to make 2 albums a year.
Yeah, I know. And you know, we used to fire a CD off and you get the copies back in a couple of weeks or a week. But now it's 6 months now.
Yeah. No, I remember that. You turn in the masters and you get the vinyl copy like 3 weeks later. Be like, what?
Yeah. But it's all changed now. And I hope it comes back, you know, but at the moment it's looking a bit doubtful.
Yeah, that's for sure. John, I got a couple questions here for you from some watchers here. Do you have a favorite piece of music tech? Asks Amanda. Any favorite synthesizers now?
It's still the ARP. I still use the ARP. It's still my favorite, ARP Odyssey.
Did you get the re-released one, the brand new one again?
Yeah, I've got 2 versions of it. There's a Behringer one and there's one made by Korg, is it? I've given one to Ben. To have down in his studio, and I've got one at home here to work with, plus the original old Odyssey that I use right from Ultravox onwards, you know.
Nice. And
it still surprises me that machine. You can still get sounds you haven't heard out of it 20, 30 years later. It's an amazing piece of kit. Deservedly a classic now.
Absolute classic. And also not a bad investment either.
Yeah.
Question for John. I've been a fan since I first heard This City and Underpass. Could you tell us about your memories and thoughts of the film Nights Electric, which used your music in several key scenes?
Oh, that's interesting because I've never seen the film.
Ah,
The guys were really nice people and sent me a sort of idea for the film, and they wanted permission, so we gave them permission, or I gave them permission to use it. And I've never actually seen the film, and I've heard lots about it. Lots of people have mentioned it, but I've not actually seen it. So one day I will, I think. I hope.
that's a good answer, though. That's honest. Another question. What is your opinion on making electronic music nowadays using Ableton, Live, Push 2, and only in the box? Do you think it is creative enough?
No,
Good.
not for me. No, too many choices. Being an instinctive minimalist, I just want one piece of kit that I can understand to work with. I don't want any pull down menus or God knows what. It's too uninteresting, and you end up with standard solutions. I'd much rather be in a studio and actually control the things by turning knobs and clicking switches and plugging things in and out, rather than a virtual setup. I don't know what it is. Digital reproductions is something else.
Yeah.
Always feels like Formica to me, and it's not what I'm really interested in. Although people do great things with it. I'm not knocking it. I mean, I think digital stuff's wonderful.
They do great things, but they don't sound like Metamatic.
No, and there's something about a real synth that sounds like a real synth, and there isn't really a substitute for that. Yeah, it's like trying to make an electronic version of a guitar. You know, it sounds similar, but it doesn't have that flexibility and organic nuances that the original thing has. Same with drum machines. You know, drum machines, you program in a certain way, and if you have a virtual version of it, you'll program it in a virtual version way.
Absolutely correct.
It's not the same. And I like the difference. You know, I think digital stuff ought to concentrate on making completely new, original stuff that hasn't been heard before, because it's capable of doing that. And very few people are doing it in that way. That it's all imitations. It's all Formica. It's imitations of something else. It's plastic trying to be wood. You know, it doesn't work. So we ought to be concentrating on new ways of playing instruments. You know, that it was interesting that the origin of Buckler synthesizers, where he wouldn't have a keyboard, because the desire was to use it in a completely different way. You know, there was that strip where you could pitch along a line, which was a great idea. I love that. Or a theremin sort of proximity control or something like that. And I think we ought to be thinking about that kind of thing. We ought to think about it in a new way. Play by proximity, play by dancing, hook it up to your heartbeat, like I want to do with my sex. You know, why can't we have the synthesizers that react with us? You know, there are enough interfaces to link into your body now. You could actually control it by movement, blood flow, pulse, respiratory methods, or whatever, sexual even. You know, we could make we're on the point of being able to make a whole new kind of music with a whole new human interface, and we're still playing it on a bloody keyboard that was invented a couple of 100 years ago. You know, why? What's the point of that?
Yeah,
I'm so inspired. I can't wait to go in my studio today. I'm going to do something just completely devoted to what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. I'd love to do it myself.
I have a studio much like Benji, so if you're ever in LA, you're more than welcome to drop by, John.
Oh, well, yes, certainly we would. Well, Benj is always keen to see other people's studios, particularly.
Oh, bring him by, bring him by.
So am I, so we'll be over.
Okay, I'll take you up on that. Charles asks, hi, John, where did you get the theme title for the song Running Across Thin Ice with Tigers from? Super fan.
Oh well, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But it was a dream. It was a dream. I've been reading some manga comics, and there I was in this dream, running, literally doing what the title says, running across thin ice with tigers and worrying about the weight of these tigers on the ice and having to run. It was like a cartoon, you know, like a sort of Daffy Duck cartoon, where or it was more like a manga. It actually looked like a manga, the dream. And I was running across ice that was falling away as I was running on it. You know, those scenes in manga comics or cartoons that do that. And the tigers were on it. The weight of the tigers was doing this, but we were all running to avoid falling into the abyss or the water, or the ice water. And I thought, yeah, it's that kind of dream. It's an anxiety dream, isn't it? Of course. And we all have these dreams. So I thought I'll write a song around that. And I was in America at the time, oddly enough, when I wrote it. I jotted it down in the hotel room. And I thought there's a song in that. And I wrote the lines like, there was an angel on Broadway, I gave him change, which I'd just done. You know, I'd given this guy in a ruined suit some money on Broadway. I was walking down Broadway. So there are lots of little bits of that trip to New York.
That's a nice backstory for that question. Last question here, John. One of the great albums of the 80s was The Golden Section. Would John consider returning to some of the songs to refresh the sound on that, like you've done for Metamatic?
Oh, yeah, it'd be nice. It needs it too. It was a confused album, that. I was trying to revisit Brit psychedelia of around that Beatles era through a kind of punk lens. This is before Oasis got onto them and did it a lot better. But this was 10 years before Oasis, I think, wasn't it? But that was the idea, because that era of music had been outlawed for a long time. It had been disapproved of, and I thought it's part of my roots, so I want to redo it. So I'd love to remake the whole thing completely, in the light of what's happened since. You know, a lot of things have happened.
So interesting. John, I'd like to thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I see it's past the 2-hour mark, and it is the evening time there in the UK.
Yep.
You guys are due for a good night little toddy or something.
A nice pint of beer would be a good thing.
Nice pint. Yeah, I'd like to join you on that one. It's the afternoon here, though. I'm so inspired. I just cannot begin to say. So I just really like to thank you for inspiring us all and continuing to inspire us all. You've never made a bad album. I mean, that's got to be, there you go. You deserve the award for never making a bad album and working with so many cool people. And I just have to encourage you to just keep it up, and please tour America.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's been a real pleasure to speak to both of you, in fact, and thank you for your patience and your kindness as well.
Do you have any last thing?
I just thought there, I first saw you when I was 16, and I'm now 61, so there's a kind of like inversion thing going on there.
Yeah, same.
But you know, it's I mean, it was 45 years in a sense. Feels like 5 minutes ago, but obviously isn't. But just thanks so much for all of the great music, John, and also the great memories as well, you know. And the thing that I've been really impressed about hearing you speak tonight and thinking about this idea of playing concerts is, I know for a fact people would want to see you, you know.
Oh my God.
I've just been over, just come back from doing some shows in the States, and you know, these people who are firing in these questions, and the people that, you know, listen to Kevin's chats on his Patreon channel, you know, there's a community out there, and it doesn't have to be a 36-day tour in 38 days, you know. There's I think people would love to see you, as long as in the States you do not allow them to abbreviate your band's name, so it's Maths, not Math. You get that, North America? It's Maths, not Math. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Real pleasure, John. Thank you so much. Really.
Thank you, guys. Big cheers to you on the pint, and best of luck. I look forward to the new Maths album. Mark, best to you, and you guys have a good night.